Today we have a great revenge on a roommate's girlfriend who tried getting someone evicted. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, think my race ruined your family? Enjoy the results of the genetic testing. At my son's birth, my ex-partner's mom told me that I'd ruined their family by having a kid with her son and tainting their family line. We're both white, but they're from a neighboring country that they pride themselves on. They showed themselves to be really vile racists in general. I'm glad we aren't family anymore, and his dad walked out a few years ago too, so the trash took itself out. Cut to yesterday, my son got the results of our genetic test kits he got as a present. He's interested in the TikToks of people seeing where they come from. Me? 81% of the background they're so precious about, no trace of the genetic profile they hate so much. My son? 53%, with around 16% of a background that they hate. Guess it wasn't me that was doing any polluting. The very first thing my son did was send his dad and grandmother the results, and obviously he has no idea what she said at his birth, but man, that has to have hurt her a little. She'll probably just do the modern solution, which is lie and just say the numbers are false and wrong. That's kind of an easy and simple thing people seem to get away with in this day and age. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy awesome stories of revenge, it would be awesome if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, made the in-laws tear apart their kitchen and buy new dishes. Last weekend, we had dinner with the family, and the mother-in-law said some thoughtless things that were hurtful. We've tried to talk to them in the past about these things, but they always brush us off as, well, we didn't mean that, why is it a big deal? So we just moved on and decided to ignore them for a little while. Well, yesterday, my spouse ran into a "you should know" post about old fire-glazed dinnerware containing high amounts of lead. We are lucky that none of our dishes are old enough, but we did spot the exact dishes the in-laws have on the might be dangerous list. We did some more research, and honestly, we can't tell whether it is actually potentially dangerous or not. One side says the obvious, any lead is bad. But there is lots of science saying, if properly made, the lead is sealed and there isn't a risk of leaking. We really don't know. We put together a message with everything, but played up the risk a bit and conveniently left out that it actually likely isn't a real risk. And now we've been told that they're going through everything we sent them. Last we heard, they are literally planning on throwing away almost all of their dinner plates and even the serving dishes. They will have to spend a lot of money to do that, most likely. I mean, it kind of makes me think of the whole Stanley Cup thing, how everybody was like, oh, Stanley Cups are amazing, and then people were literally stealing them from stores because the value is going up, and then they find out that it actually is made with lead, but it's sealed in the cup, so it should never be a problem. Honestly, even if it is sealed, like there's still a fundamental chance somewhere that something failed, and it begins to make me question any insulated metal water bottle I've ever had. Our next story is, property lines can be fun. Years ago, I moved next door to a very competitive type A finance guy. He was a jerk. My wife and I purchased the worst house in the best neighborhood. I am somewhat handy and planned a complete renovation and addition. After a few years of small improvements, we decided to invest about $250,000 with an addition and complete facelift. I had the property surveyed, got the elevations from an architect, did site work, and completed the transformation. The house fit into the neighborhood and surrounding houses perfectly, basically improved and increased all property values. During the transformation, all the neighbors would stop by with compliments. Our 4 kids were always outside and we got along with everyone, even the competitive neighbor and his family. The last part of the master plan I had in mind was the landscaping. Early on a Saturday morning, my friend and builder went to a wholesale nursery and picked up about 25 somewhat mature plantings, including rhododendron plants. These were as big as you could buy, transport, and install. We worked all weekend. I put 6 in a row along the front yard property line of competitive neighbor. Monday morning, I got a call in my office from said neighbor complaining that the plants were on his property. They were not, and I explained the survey I had done for the addition, etc. He wasn't having it, and we went back and forth for a couple weeks. Finally, as he was fuming to his wife, my wife heard about it, so I called the surveyor. We talked and he said he'd take a look when he could fit it into his schedule. I thanked him and asked him to put orange stakes along the property line if I was right, and to give me a call if I am wrong. Needless to say, neighbor had been complaining to all the other neighbors about what I had done. Anyway, fast forward about 2 weeks later on a Friday, I'm taking a right into my street and I see about 10 bright orange painted 2-inch square stakes up my property line to the left of the beautiful plants. At this point, Mr. Neighbor has complained about me at his fancy country club, and many in my small town heard about the situation. I found this out later. Anyway, I didn't say anything until he came over asking me when I was going to take the stakes down. Those stakes stayed up for about 9 or 10 months, just long enough for everyone in the neighborhood and all the people who went to his parties to ask him why they were there. My wife and I also went to some of his gatherings, and he was kissing my butt and asking when I was going to remove them. I always responded with a smile, "Oh, when I get around to it." I mean, in general, it's important if you're a homeowner to get a survey done if you can get one done, hopefully not too expensively. For some reason, I heard a number of people say, "Oh, it shouldn't cost more than a couple $100. But then I've had relatives who deal with angry neighbors all the time, and so obviously land disputes become a hot topic of contention, and so they wanted to get their own survey done, and they couldn't find anybody that would do it less than for like $1,000. Our next story is, write tickets inappropriately and tow cars? You'll have to eat crow while I laugh. Over 20 years ago, I lived in an apartment complex made up of several buildings, each with about 60 units, and each building has only 15 garage spots and about 20 parking spaces. So the majority must park on the street on a long drive. There was going to be a re-tarring project, and a couple days before, temporary no parking signs were placed up for Tuesday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. along the street. It was a Monday and a holiday, so a lot of people were home, and my roommates and I heard a loud sound outside and saw cars being towed, including mine, and a police officer writing tickets and placing them on all the cars before being towed. I ran outside and up to the officer and asked why he was ticketing the cars, and he pointed at the sign. I said, "It is Monday and the sign says Tuesday. We just have to move them by 8 a.m. tomorrow." At the time, I was just 21, but was often mistaken for being a very young teen. The jerk responded, "I don't care if it says Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. If I see a no parking sign, I'm not going to park there. Tell your mommy and daddy that their cars are moved up the street and they have a $50 ticket and a $190 tow fee." It might have been slightly different amounts, but pretty close. I asked for his badge number, which he refused, and then he continued to ignore me. I ran back into my apartment and called the local station. At first, I got the runaround until I asked for IA and was finally passed to this guy's lieutenant, a woman. When I told her what had happened, as well as his attitude, she said she'd have to come down to see the signs herself. About 15 minutes later, she arrived, and she pointed out the weekday to him. I had the distinct impression that he had a problem with women in general, but especially ones who challenge him like myself and his lieutenant, and she seemed to appreciate my indignant anger at his infantilization of me. All of the tickets had to be removed, and the ticket numbers needed to be accounted for. She made him apologize to my grinning face, and he had to write out an apology to each of the owners of each of the cars explaining his mistake, and that if there was any damage to contact him or his lieutenant. This took tons of time, so my roommates and I set up lawn chairs and sat eating popcorn and grinning ear to ear while we watched. The absolute delight I felt at the butt having to make a record of each of those tickets and write an apology note will forever bring me a little satisfaction. He thought he could abuse his little petty power, so I got my little petty revenge. Now, I don't know if this guy was just like happy to screw people over, or if there was like some kind of way that they got some kind of commission on this, but like I just can't understand why they would act any other way. If he's just doing it just to be vindictive, that dude should not be an officer. I mean, even if he's doing it for some kind of weird commission type thing, he still doesn't deserve to be a cop. Our next story is, brother learns when I tell him he'll be sorry, he'll be sorry. So my brother and I used to live together in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. He had a nasty habit of using chewing tobacco, which I wasn't fussed about if he did it in his room because I smoked in my room. And I felt that judging how he partook of tobacco as opposed to how I did would be hypocritical. I'm an odd duck and like to take hot baths in a dark bathroom. It's just something I've done since I was a kid. I was sitting on our toilet getting out of my clothes to bathe when I felt something pour down my back. I hopped up, slammed the light on, and saw it was one of the soda cans my brother used to spit tobacco juice into. Needless to say, I was violently disgusted and downright enraged. I took my bath, changed my clothes, and proceeded to give my brother a verbal bashing, which ended with me ominously threatening him that if he ever left a spit can on the back of the toilet again, he'd be sorry. It wasn't even a week later and he did it again, except I wasn't originally intending to bathe, I was just using the toilet to change my tampon. My brother was at work, so after I got myself sorted out, I wrapped my used tampon in toilet paper and hid it amongst his blankets, as that's all I could think of that he would find as disgusting as I found the sensation of his cold tobacco spit pouring down my spine. A few hours later, my brother returned home and waddled to his bedroom and closed the door. Suddenly, I heard him shriek like a little girl. He came storming into my room, hooting and hollering. Finally, I just calmly said, "I know, huh? Disgusting, isn't it? I told you you'd be sorry." He never left another spit can on the back of the toilet for the entire duration of our cohabitation. Needless to say, if you got a habit like that in a shared household, it's one thing, but when you leave the nasty remains of your habit around other people, especially like places of comfort or places of compromise, I think you're definitely being a jerk. He definitely got the message though, period. Our next story is, don't touch the special plates, huh? So I don't know if this is actual revenge because they don't know, but it's still petty and makes me feel good. I, 26-year-old female, had this boyfriend. We met when I was 19 and started dating a few days after my 20th birthday. I was raised in an extremely isolated environment, both socially and physically. I never had a high school sweetheart, and he was my first everything. He was 6 years older than me and had 2 kids. We were together for 3 extremely hard years. When we moved in together, his mother gave us these blue and white, I want to say Chinese-style plates and bowls. The plates were huge and so were the bowls, so they were very impractical. It also came with a few small butter plates in the same style. When we were unpacking them, he made this huge fuss about how special these plates were, and how they were his aunties who passed away and how I had to take very good care of them, and I shouldn't touch them unless it was a special occasion. So I stored them away safely and never dared touch them. While we were together, all I wanted was a cat or a rat as a pet, and surprise, surprise, I wasn't allowed to have either. So one year, my father bought me a rat for my birthday, and this really made my boyfriend ticked off. He was nice to the rat and would pat her and hold her, but he was upset that his authority had been undermined. The night I dumped him, we got into this huge fight and he said he would kill my rat. He stormed down the end of the house and kicked her cage into a wall. She was fine. I'd finally had enough, and we broke up and I got a cat. One day I dropped and broke my kitty's dish, so I was looking around for something to use. Turns out he left his ever so special plates right where I packed them away. So now my kitty cat eats her dinner off his dead auntie's plates, and I get a little thrill every time I feed her because I know he'd be so ticked off. Not because he cares about the plates, if he did, they wouldn't be here, but because the pet he said I wasn't allowed to have is eating off the plates I wasn't allowed to touch. I mean, this is just a great story in general. Somebody who was under the thumb of some terrible, controlling ex, getting out of that circumstance and finding a way to treat that memory of him with some real satisfaction. Our next story is, treat my dad like crap, have fun with your puzzle. I love my mom, but she's an awful person. She suffers from undiagnosed GAD, BPD, and OCD, which has made her increasingly mean-spirited, narcissistic, and just an all-around soul-sucking wretch. My mom, who hasn't worked a job since the 90s, treats my dad like crap and is always ragging on him as soon as he gets home from work. She'll whine about him dragging dirt into the house even though he takes off his shoes at the door. She yells at him for having the TV too loud even though it's at 11 out of 100 and you can barely hear the dialogue of the show. She complains about everything, and even I can't have a conversation with her without her speaking only in terms of negatives. Bring up something benign like the weather, and she'll complain it's too hot or it's too cold or we're in a drought. Or we're going to get flooded because of the rain. My dad, on the other hand, is a peaceful old goober who wants nothing more than to work an honest day's wage, try to provide as best as he can for my mom, and maybe watch his Stargate shows in peace. Well, my mom is addicted to soda. She drinks like 8 cans of pop a day. As you all know, soda is freaking ridiculously expensive these days. My dad, always thinking of my mom, noticed that our local grocer was having a huge buy some get some for free deal on cases of soda. He enlisted my help and we bought like $300 worth of soda, hitting the store a couple of times to get past the 10 case limit. We went back to my parents' house and started stacking the soda in the basement. Did my mom thank my dad for this bounty of soda? Heck no. She proceeded to rip him a new you-know-what because he bought 7-Up instead of Fresca. Mind you, the 7-Up was like 5% of the soda we bought. The rest was Pepsi or Coke. I couldn't believe how awful she was being to my poor dad. Cue the petty revenge. See, my mom loves to do jigsaw puzzles. She'll sit in her own private TV room for hours watching shows and completing endless amounts of puzzles. She saves the puzzles when she's done and puts them back in their original box so she can do them again after enough time has passed that she's forgotten the puzzle. Well, after she blew up on my dad about the soda, I excused myself and went upstairs to use the bathroom. I could still hear her complaining at my dad downstairs, and I stepped into her room to find a semi-completed puzzle sprawled on her desk in front of the TV. I grabbed a single piece from the box and put it in my pocket. Pretty small and petty, I know, but I also know it will drive her nuts that she was just one piece off from completing the puzzle. It's even better knowing that she'll realize she's a piece short as she gets down to the last 5 or so pieces and realizes that she doesn't have enough to complete the puzzle. I felt pretty happy about this petty revenge as I was about to walk out of her room when I thought, freak it. And I went back in and quickly opened every completed puzzle box I could find and took a single puzzle piece out of each one. I hope she slowly goes nuts each time she decides to redo a previously completed puzzle and finds herself short just one puzzle piece. Honestly, I feel like this is one of those things that sounds good in theory, but actually might be making things a bit worse for your dad. I mean, it comes down to this. Who's the person who took all the puzzle pieces? Either it's going to be OP or it's going to be the dad, and a person like that is going to do some benching at people. Our next story is, borrow my camera without asking and return it damaged? Sure. This was quite a few years ago when I was in the midst of separating from my then wife. I had found out that she cheated, which is kind of relevant to the story. We were urgently getting our house ready to sell, and since we were broke, it meant unhappily cohabitating and doing a lot of the work ourselves. We had agreed to spend the weekend tidying the yard and painting window frames, but at the last minute, she said that her boss had asked her to take a colleague's place on a conference trip. Fine, I'll spend the weekend tidying the yard by myself. Sometime during the weekend, I noticed that my digital camera, this was in the days before ubiquitous smartphone cameras, was missing from its usual spot on the bookshelf. I needed some photos off it, so spent a while looking for it, but eventually gave up. Sunday night comes around, and my ex returns from her conference, drops her bags, and heads straight out to a family dinner. The living situation being somewhat tense, we both found ways to keep out of the house. The camera had mysteriously reappeared in its usual place, but now with a big scrape on the corner, like it had been dropped on concrete. Now, this wasn't a top-end camera by any means, but fairly new and something that I'd pay for myself out of my meager pay. Luckily, it still seemed to work fine. The next day while she was at work, I went to retrieve my photos from the camera and found the SD card full of photos of her on what looked like a romantic weekend getaway with a guy who I assumed was her boyfriend. So not only had she taken my camera without asking and damaged it, but she had lied about the conference and left me to work on my own so that she could enjoy a relaxing weekend with her new boyfriend. She obviously hadn't expected me to use the camera right away. I was ready to delete all her photos and call her on her BS, but for the sake of ongoing relationship property negotiations, I had to avoid drama. So I decided on some petty revenge instead. I transferred all her photos onto my computer and started to put my amateur Photoshop skills to use. I spent the next hour and a half going through every picture that featured her new boyfriend and editing his face in each one, giving him blotchy, pallid skin, subtly morphing his features to make him asymmetrical, making one eye bigger than the other, making his teeth yellow, giving him a slightly unhinged look, etc. I restrained myself so that it wouldn't be obvious that the photos had been edited, but he definitely looked unappealing in a way that you might not be able to put your finger on. I transferred all the photos back onto the camera, overriding the originals, and then I put the camera back on the shelf and went about my day. The photos disappeared off my camera sometime over the next few days, so I guessed my ex had moved them elsewhere to cover her tracks. I never heard anything about my revenge, but to this day it warms my heart that I ruined the memory of that romantic weekend for her. Well, at least this wasn't like pictures they took on their once-in-a-lifetime honeymoon. Like, yeah, OP ruined all of their pictures, but it was pictures that are replaceable, right? It's not like they ruined the most cherished memories this couple will ever have. Our next story is Lawn Care Revenge. Quite some time ago, I lived in a tiny town, and me and my good close buddy loved skateboarding. We would ride our boards wherever we could. One issue we had is as we rode our skateboards to his house after school on the public sidewalk, the house 2 houses down from him was owned by a very mean old man. This old man would sit on his porch and yell and scream at us for whatever his issue was with us. I think he just hated joy and fun, but he claimed private property, public sidewalk, destroying property, we were just sidewalk surfing, no damage, and destroying the peace. Dude, it's 4 in the afternoon, we just got out of school. He made it very clear we were not allowed to ride our skateboards anywhere near his house. This curmudgeon also kept an absolute immaculate lawn. More power to you, bud, I like a good lawn. I'm talking pro baseball field levels of mowing lines in this grass. It was honestly impressive. We mentioned this old man's harassment to us to my buddy's father, but he shrugged it off. Leave the old man alone, just ignore him and do your thing. But then, said old man comes to the house and really gives my friend's dad the business. Gives all the complaints, but then the kicker. He tells him he's a crappy father and should be ashamed of himself for letting his kids be kids? For the rest of the time I hung out there, his dad would purposefully mow his own lawn in the most bizarre, awful patterns. Purposefully leave certain areas fully grown and unkempt, only for the purpose of making this Grinch of a neighbor angry and frustrated. It literally took him longer to mow his lawn to do it badly, but it was worth it to him, knowing old man can see his lawn from his porch and ruin his vision of a perfect life. Old man complained constantly about the yard to Papa Bear, but he could nothing. This isn't some HOA, buddy. We live in a small town and I can do whatever I want on my property was always his response. Thanks for sticking up for us and letting me eat all your peanut butter. This guy is a real one because when the kids came complaining, he said, just do your own thing, don't worry about the old guy. Pretty cool response, 1. 2, intentionally trying to piss this guy off after they realize he is just this angry old curmudgeon. Cool, point number 2. And then 3, he let OP eat all the peanut butter. How much cooler does it get than that? Our next story is, roommate's girlfriend tried getting me evicted. I got her dumped. This is an old one, but still entertaining. 7 years ago, I moved into a 4-bedroom house with 3 of my friends. I was the only woman among 3 dudes. One of the roommates was the owner's son. We were all friends in college, and honestly, it was the best 2 years ever living situation-wise. We all had different work schedules, and because I worked the earliest, 6 a.m., I had the only downstairs bedroom. My friend, let's call him Jay, who worked night shift and got home at 4:30 a.m., had the room above me so that we didn't wake each other coming home. During the week, Jay and I would eat breakfast together before he went to bed and I went to work. We had a jar in the kitchen we would all throw spare cash in, like $5 or $10 at a time each. That was for common groceries like milk, eggs, basic bread, and occasional house meals and beer because we were in our early to mid-20s. The rule was always that if you used the last of the common use stuff, you'd take the jar to cover the cost and grab it from the store ASAP. When we grabbed pizza or I'd make a meal for everyone, we used the same fund. This is all very important. About 5 months into the living situation, Jay met Karen and started dating her. He brought her to one of our game nights to introduce her to us to get a feel for how she'd mesh with us, and all was fine when she thought I was only the girlfriend of another roommate. Because we were playing in the dining room right by my room, Karen saw me go in that room to grab a sweater early in the night. Then she saw my roommate, the one she assumed I was dating, go upstairs to grab his phone charger. The entire vibe changed, and she started to ask me who I was dating. She was floored when my roommates confirmed I lived there, I had my own room, and I wasn't dating any of them. She saved face, said she was just surprised I'd want to live with 3 men, and we moved on. Cam, the owner's son, and I were the only ones that realized Karen saw this as a problem. After that, she started coming over right after I got off work and only leaving when Jay went to work. If I came out of my room to the living room, she'd ask why I was out there. If I was going to the kitchen, she would remark that I was being disrespectful to her and Jay and interrupting their time together. If I was talking to Jay when she got there, she'd practically grind on him and shove her tongue down his throat. She even complained that I was ruining the mood for doing my laundry. Jay had made it clear that he knew she was being a problem and had started pushing for them to just chill in his room. Unfortunately, she used the opportunity to make some of the worst adult entertainment imitation noises any of us other roommates had ever heard. We laughed it off and just left those two alone. After a couple of weeks, she had gotten drunk before Jay went to work, and we insisted she stay in his room and sleep it off. I literally brought her food and Tylenol because girl was going to feel like heck in the morning. The next morning, Jay came home and started making breakfast for me and him when Karen came down and just started screaming. She woke the other two roommates up. She accused Jay of cheating, accused me of having relations with all the guys, then made the dumbest statement possible. She demanded I pay Jay back for the food he was wasting on me. Cam literally grabbed a $5 from the jar and slapped it in Jay's hand. Cam and I had a come to Jesus talk with Jay. We both told him if she couldn't deal with me living there, then she could no longer come over. Jay asked for a week to figure things out, trying to claim she was just caught by surprise when she saw him making me breakfast and not thinking clearly. We gave him a week. In that week, mysteriously, the grocery jar was getting raided. We all noticed and talked about it. We noticed my clean dishes were appearing still clean in the sink. Little things were disappearing from common rooms and weirdly appearing in my room. Karen was being sweet. She was not exactly covert. Cam and I knew she was sowing chaos, but being curious where this was headed, we just watched. After a week, Cam gets a call from his mom asking if I'd been going through something lately. Apparently, a concerned party sent her picture after picture and story upon story about how I was trashing the house and stealing. Karen expected this to get me in trouble. Lucky for me, my landlord was actually worried I was not doing okay and wanted Cam to help me get through it. Cam told me, and I started planning my petty revenge. First thing I did was eliminate the grocery jar. I split up what was in it evenly between the four of us, and told them that because of the raided stash, I felt it needed to go away. Karen didn't like this, but when asked why, she claimed it was rude for me to make a unilateral decision. Cam backed me. Battle won. Then I started hanging with Cam in the living room every day. She complained, but Jay told her it's our house and we can do as we please. When she would go to the kitchen, one of us always asked what she was doing in our fridge. She stopped going in our fridge after 2 days. Just a little information, Cam and I met in college where we both studied theater, specifically acting. That Friday, we hung out in his room right next to Karen's. We made a bit of a show when Jay left and acted like he could not know that Cam and I were hanging out alone in his room. This caught Karen's attention. We started shaking the bed. Two nerdy people hip thrusting the end of the bed to give the illusion the spicy thing was going down is quite awkward, but oh so entertaining. Within minutes, we got a text from Jay asking what we were doing. Cam replied, "Playing video games." After 10 minutes, we stopped the bed shaking and actually did play video games on mute. When Jay demanded a FaceTime session, he saw exactly what he needed to see. Me beating Cam in Mario Party. We cycled through this for a few hours. After a while, we decided to put the finishing touches on. We made a big deal about me needing to go to my room before Jay got home, and Karen took the bait. We could see this little bit of light being cut off in the slightly open door by her watching. Cam and I stage kissed, and I headed to the living room. Jay came in 10 minutes later to find me watching a movie, normal for me, and asked what was up. I told him I'd been up playing video games all night with Cam. He tells me Karen claimed we were doing the nasty, and I told him we didn't. He goes to bed. The next day, Jay calls a house meeting without Karen. He tells us she's making claims of us having a relationship and hiding it from him. We say she's full of it. We tell him about the frame job she tried to pull, how she went to Cam's mom to get me in trouble. Jay asks our other roommate if he'd heard anything from the bedroom. Bro doesn't even flinch and says, "I heard OP calling Cam her bench and the usual Mario Party crap talk. They weren't banging." Jay asked about the grocery jar. We all told him we suspected Karen. The next day, he broke up with her for trying to turn him against us. He called her a liar and a thief. A few months later, he dated another girl. She was awesome and they're married now. I was a bridesmaid, but the absolute best part, Karen being one of the waitstaff and seeing Cam with his wife and me with my fiance, telling them the story of how we once dry humped a mattress fully clothed to get back at a thief. Yes, Jay knows the whole story and he didn't mind at all. To address the reason Jay wanted to know if we were actually getting funky, he is the kind of dude that hates useless secrets. If Cam and I were hooking up, he'd be fine with it. If we were hooking up and actively hiding it from him like we couldn't trust him, he'd have an issue. That was why we played hard into the Jay can't know part. Though Cam says Jay secretly wanted us, Cam and I to get together, but nah. Am I wrong for feeling kind of bad for Cam at the end? Like, if there was ever a chance or they were even remotely interested, OP was like, nah, I'd rather have staged the whole thing than even consider any kind of serious stuff. I'm just gonna hope Cam never actually had any interest. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.